we've done in the Old Testament about, it started with the Exodus and the people marching through the desert, and we looked at the tabernacle of Moses that the Lord commanded Moses to have the people build, which was a place of worship for God, and for them to offer sacrifices for their sin. And one of the main pieces of this tabernacle that the Lord commanded them to make was the Ark of the Covenant. And we all know, we've heard of the Ark of the Covenant, we've seen movies about the Ark of the Covenant. We'll actually talk about that a little bit later, about where we believe it is today. And so I wanted to look at it kind of by itself, because it's really a big deal. This is where God chose to reside during the time of Moses. And to me, when I just look at it, it's funny, because we know God is everywhere. God is spirit. He's sitting next to Connie, and he's over there sitting next to Laura, and he's in China somewhere, all at the same time. He's everywhere. But yet, he chose for himself the place where people would go to worship him, a little box. You know, they always say you can't put God in a box. Well, he put himself in a box. It's kind of weird. And here's what the Lord told Moses. Have them make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. Now, if we use an 18-inch cubit, which is kind of the general, what everybody kind of thinks it was about, it actually changed all the time, but 18 inches is close. So it was about 3.5 feet long. So when we think of the Ark of the Covenant, I think a lot of times we think of it being really big. It was about 3.75 feet long, 2.5 feet wide, and 2.5 feet high. So it really wasn't huge. But you got to remember also, it was covered completely in gold. This thing probably weighed quite a bit. And it was built by the Israelites when they reached Mount Sinai during the Exodus. And Mount Sinai, of course, we talked about that today in Sunday schools, where Moses also received the Ten Commandments twice, as we talked about. And it's generally dated, this was around 1450 BC. And the instructions for the ark were part of this overreaching, comprehensive plan by God to develop a system of worship to go along with the covenant relationship that God had with his people, the Israelites. And the ark was designed to be that symbol of the presence of God in the middle of his people. And remember, again, this is one of the things that was part of this tabernacle that was carried around for 400 years to be used for worship until the permanent temple was built. So, we've talked about it over the last few weeks, how it was made of acacia wood, covered with gold. It was decorated with gold. The rings and the poles that were made to carry it were all covered in gold. The top of it, the mercy seat, was on top of it and had the two cherubim facing each other. Those were made of a talent of pure gold that was hammered into shape. And the place between the two cherubim, right there in the middle, was where God promised to speak to Moses to give him commands as to what the Israelites were to do. So God's presence would reside between the wings of those angels. Exodus 25:22, it says, there above the cover, between the two cherubim that are over the Ark of the Covenant law, we'll kind of talk about that, I will meet with you and give you all my commands for the Israelites. Once a year, the priest would enter the Holy of Holies where this was held and sprinkle blood to atone for the sins of the nation of Israel on that ark. Leviticus 16:14 is where we read this. He is to take some of the bull's blood and with his finger sprinkle it on the front of the atonement cover. Then he shall sprinkle some of it with his finger 7 times before the atonement cover. So, the old covenant on the Day of Atonement is no longer needed. Why is it no longer needed? Jesus Christ came and became the new covenant. And we talked about that, the old and the new covenant, in which we did not have to do sacrifices because Christ sacrificed himself on the cross for us. Okay, one of the things that people talk about, what's inside this box? The first contents in it are the 10 Commandments. The actual tablets of the 10 Commandments that Moses brought down the second time. What happened to the first? Did everybody know that Moses got the 10 Commandments twice? He got them once, and what happened to those? He came down off Mount Sinai, and the people had made a golden calf, and he smashed them. So he straightened the people out on that one, went back up, and God gave him a new set of the 10 Commandments. So those are inside the Ark of the Covenant. Can you imagine being able to see the original 10 Commandments? Exodus 40:20, he took the tablets of the covenant law and placed them in the ark, attached the poles to the ark, and put the atonement cover over it. It's just amazing to me. Second, it has a jar of manna. That was done as a sign of remembrance of the Lord providing for his people. And this is very interesting to me too. Well, let me read the verse first. Exodus 16:33. So Moses said to Aaron, take a jar and put an omer, and that's about 2 quarts. So this is a big jar of it, of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept for the generations to come. Now, do you remember the story of when the manna would fall and God told the people, don't collect it? And it didn't save. He provided it for them every day. They couldn't save it. But there's 2 quarts of it inside the Ark of the Covenant, and I'm guessing it's probably still good. If you opened it today, you'd be able to see what it is. Again, one of those God's miracles. And lastly, in Numbers, we find the last piece that's in there, and that is Aaron's budding rod. His rod was placed in the front of the ark. Numbers 17:10, the Lord said to Moses, put back Aaron's staff in front of the ark of the covenant law to be kept as a sign to the rebellious. So we have actual stuff in this little chest. And Matthew Henry, a very old Bible commentator, states that the 3 items were preserved to show to after ages, that's us, how the ancient church was taught, was fed, and how it was ruled. They were taught by the 10 Commandments. They were fed with the manna from God, and they were ruled with the staff of Aaron. So they weren't just arbitrary things. These had eternal meaning to them. Why did God choose to house himself in the ark? So the ark was housed in the tabernacle. It's where they brought their offerings. And before God gave instructions to build the tabernacle, he told Moses this in Exodus 25, then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. So part of the sanctuary included the Ark of the Covenant and the cover that we talked about, the 2 cherubim that sat on top, and the mercy seat between them. That area between the 2 cherubim they called a mercy seat, and that's where the blood was sprinkled. That's where God spoke to Moses. And the Lord said he would come to the mercy seat to give the Israelites his commands. It's just, I really want to see the Ark of the Covenant. We'll talk about where it is now. God came to the ark when the priests were present. There were certain times and certain rituals that they would go into the Holy of Holies, and God was there for them. They carried the ark with poles because the priests would die if they touched the place where God resides. Now, why would that be? Why would God do that? The reason for this is because God's glory and presence cannot be touched by man. Our sinful natures cause us to keel over if we come into the presence of the Lord without the Holy Spirit residing in us. That wasn't my words, that was another commentator. Because these events took place in the Old Testament, before the birth and death of Jesus, the Israelites did not have the Holy Spirit residing within them. So they were impure. The Holy Spirit wasn't there. So if they touched the very presence of God, they would die. What happened when Moses asked God to see him face to face? What did God tell him? You will surely die. But he allowed him to see a glimpse of his glory. So it's really the same thing, because without the Holy Spirit, we cannot face God directly. So, interesting. So the ark was part of the tabernacle, but it wasn't just sitting there. It got used. So we're going to look at kind of the biblical, historical events of it. In Joshua 3, the Israelites needed to cross the Jordan River to get to the Promised Land. And so the orders were given to follow the priests who were carrying the ark across the river. In verse 5, it says, Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. And then the next day in verse 7 we read, today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Now think about that. They're getting to a river they need to cross. And what's God say? You will know that I am with you, as I was with Moses. What do you think is going to happen to this body of water? What did he do for Moses when he came to the Red Sea? Parted it. So the priest brought the ark to the river, and the waters stopped and allowed them to cross. After everyone made it to the other side, the ark was removed and the waters filled the river. So the ark represented God's presence and allowed the people to safely cross the Jordan. So just as God parted the Red Sea for Moses, his presence allowed that river to part and allow the people to cross. And remember again, we're not talking about 50 people here. We were talking a long time. Those guys were standing there holding those poles with the ark on it. So as the Israelites continued their journey, and we get to Joshua 6, just a few chapters later, we get to another point. In Joshua 6, the first part of the chapter, it says, now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. They get to Jericho. They know this is the land that God has given them, and they cannot get in. They're not opening the doors. Everything is locked tight. Then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. What? We can't get in. God goes, yeah, see, I'm giving it to you. Then God instructs him, march around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have priests carry trumpets of ram horns in front of the ark. So when they marched around the city for 6 days, they were carrying the ark in front of them. So the people did what God told them to do, and they took over the city. God's presence and his power through the ark-carrying army caused the walls of Jericho to simply fall down. And they took over the city. In 1 Samuel 4, we talk about the Israelites fighting against the Philistines, and they were getting slaughtered. So they decided to get the ark out and hope that its presence would help them defeat their enemy. When it arrived, the Philistines got very scared. They knew the stories. And they were scared that a god had entered their camp, and so they immediately fought, beat down the Israelites, and stole the ark. So the Israelites don't have it anymore. 1 Samuel 5. This is where it gets good again. After the Philistines had captured the ark of God, they took it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then they carried the ark into Dagon's temple and set it beside Dagon. Dagon was one of their gods, and they had a big statue of him. When the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, there was Dagon, fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. They took Dagon and put him back in his place. But the following morning when they rose, there was Dagon, fallen on his face on the ground before the ark of the Lord. His head and his hands had been broken off and were lying on the threshold. Only his body remained. That's pretty cool. God didn't have to kill people. He's just like, oh, you think you're God special? Watch this. It's going to bow down to me. So further on in the story, the Lord's hand was heavy on the people of Ashdod and its vicinity. He brought devastation on them and afflicted them with tumors. When the people of Ashdod saw what was happening, they said, the ark of the God of Israel must not stay here with us, because his hand is heavy on us and on Dagon our God. So they called together the rulers of the Philistines and asked them, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? And they answered, have the ark of the God of Israel moved to Gath. So they moved the ark of the God of Israel. Well, it's destroying our town. Let's send them over here. See if they have better experience. They didn't. They had the same types of hardships. So finally, after 7 months, the Philistines realized this was beyond them, and they needed to return the ark. So in 1 Samuel 6, we see that the Philistines decide to return the ark. They put it on a cart, and they loaded it with gold as guilt offerings, is the way it phrases it. So they hitched it to a cart, or hitched the cart to cows, and headed them out. The cart stopped in a field, and the Levites took the ark, and they set it on a rock and presented sacrifices and burnt offerings to the Lord. So it was returned. Okay. Now the place that they moved the ark to is called Beth Shemesh. And in 1 Samuel 6:19, we read, but God struck down some of the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, putting 70 of them to death because they looked into the ark of the Lord. Somebody decided to peek. The people mourned because of the heavy blow the Lord had dealt them. In 1 Samuel 7, it goes on to explain that people from another area came for the chest and brought it into the house of Abinadab, and his son guarded the ark, and it stayed in Abinadab for about 20 years. So it found a home. We go to 2 Samuel chapter 6, and David had the troops retrieve the ark, and two of Abinadab's sons, Uzzah and Ahio, started to take the ark to Jerusalem. And some of you may remember this story. During the journey, the cart tipped, and Uzzah reached out to catch the ark, and he died when he touched it. So, they didn't want to move it anymore. So David placed it in the house of Obed, the Gittite, and for 3 months it stayed there. Can you imagine David? David, we were on the way with the ark, and it kind of got tilted a little bit, and yeah, that guy's kid died because he touched it. Let's just leave it there. That'll be okay. But later, David retrieved the ark and continued the journey to Jerusalem. Now, we get into 2 Chronicles, and we see the last known location, or last mention of the ark. In 2 Chronicles 35:3, he said to the Levites, who instructed all Israel and who had been consecrated to the Lord. Here's what he tells them. Put the sacred ark in the temple that Solomon, son of King David of Israel, built. It is not to be carried about on your shoulders. Now serve the Lord your God and his people Israel. So it went to its permanent home in the temple. Then what happened? We don't know. It's believed that when Nebuchadnezzar took over Jerusalem that the ark was destroyed. It went missing after the destruction, but when you jump ahead to Revelation, we read, "Then God's temple in heaven was opened, and within his temple was seen the ark of his covenant. And there came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and a severe hailstorm." So we know we will see the Ark of the Covenant one day. So, theories about where it is today. Some of these are good. We really don't know. We don't know if it still exists on earth, but there are a lot of people who think it does. First, there are traditions that suggest that the ark was hidden somewhere beneath the temple in Jerusalem, and it's still sitting there today. The traditional Jewish people hold that theory as very popular of where it is, that it's being held there for a specified time, and then it'll be brought out. Another one is that it's in Ethiopia today. And perhaps the most well-known theory is that the ark resides in the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Axum, Ethiopia. And it's the Ethiopian Orthodox Church says the ark was brought to Ethiopia by the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This is the weird part. It was to be guarded by a monk who was the only person allowed to see the ark, and so it can't be verified. So who knows? Another theory suggests it was hidden in Egypt. And here's you might remember some of these words if you've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark 85 times like I have. It's believed that it's hidden in the tunnels beneath the ancient temple in Tanis, and that's where the movie was set. And of course that's why that's popular, is everybody thinks that's true. There's no historical evidence at all to support that. And then some speculate that it's in Europe, but again, there's no evidence at all to support that. It's just somebody's theory. Mount Nebo, there's some outside of the Bible writings that indicate that it may be in at Mount Nebo, which is in Jordan.